Good morning, all. Before I begin, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the listeners for joining here today. I'm Devarshik Padia, and I'm Global Brand Manager for QC Organisms at THERMOFISHER Scientific. I have the pleasure of working with quality control strains for nearly 10 years, and the topic of presentation has always been close to my heart. In this short presentation, we will look into various sources of cultures, the variety of culture formats, and then we'll discuss a few facts on passage numbers, seed lot technique, and best practices overall for culture maintenance. Best culture practice always starts with authenticated strains, and I cannot emphasize enough on how much important that is. Quality control cultures need to be sourced from reputed depositories such as the ATCC, NCTC, or DSMZ. Depositories maintain chain of custody from the original source of material till the day you receive them. They also authenticate the material using a battery of tests. The same strains from the culture collections are also available in a variety of easy-to-use derivatives such as the culture loops from the THERMOFISHER Scientific. However, what is not an authentic strain is a culture that you get from laboratory of your friend at the other end of the town. Say no to such practices. There is too much at risk from using an unauthenticated strain. You're risking your patient samples because the quality control material that you just used is likely not to be correct. On top, sharing such strains with other organizations will most likely be prohibited if it is a known depository culture. Overall, this is not something that is worth losing your accreditation or reputation for. When you're buying derivative cultures, make sure they're coming from the original cultures. You will see the symbols like these, the ATCC licensed derivative. Commercial companies like THERMOFISHER always source strains from ATCC or NCTC to produce licensed derivatives that are noted in the regulatory standards. Nowadays, almost all the regulatory bodies provide cross-references of strains from different depositories. In any scenario, if you do not find listing of your equivalent strains that you just bought on that document, please check with the regulatory body if it is okay to use that strain. This might save you from an unnecessary argument when you are with your auditor. It is absolutely critical to ensure that the culture you receive has gone through a series of tests to confirm its identity. A good quality certificate will include results from a range of tests, including morphological, biochemical, and genetic tests. Working with different culture formats. Cultures from culture collections are generally available in a conventional single or double glass vial. The cultures are freeze-dried and they can be stored for extremely long time. When you're working with conventional glass vials, you need to be sure to follow safe opening practice. Scour briskly on the top of the vial to break it open. It is always best to add liquid broth to rehydrate the freeze-dried powder. Do not try to tip the vial over to empty the contents. Use gentle pipetting to be sure not to cause material to be aerosolized. Generally, you can keep the microorganism growing within 5 to 10 ml of liquid broth, or you can add a few drops of this rehydrated broth on a non-selective media plate. You can also get such qualitative cultures in a convenience format, such as the culti loops from THERMOFISHER Scientific. An example of these loops, the microorganisms are gel preserved in a stable form for up to 18 months of shelf life. As you would expect from a convenience format, you would simply tear open the pack, stick to the plate, and incubate accordingly to the instructions provided. These convenience cultures also come as freeze-dried discs, such as the Ramelbacter discs. You would pick a disc from bottle, apply on the agar, and strip. Best practices for preparing your own stocks of QC organisms. In this, we'll discuss the seed stock concept, passage number, and storage techniques. Seed stock or seed lot technique. All regulatory bodies advise to maintain culture of QC organisms through seed stock method. I'll try to explain this concept through the example of production of culti-loops QC organisms from THERMOFISHER. When you receive a culture from depositories, you generally grow them in either broth or start plates that we discussed earlier. The material grown up here is crucially important, and if you are planning to make frozen stocks, this is the material you should use. We call this culture as your master seed stock. At this point, we would make several vials. After a minimum of 48 hours of freezing, we would pull one of the vials out to check the purity of the material, do biochemical analysis, and everything else that is generally recorded in the quality certificate of the final material. When you are making frozen seed lot, you're also required to incorporate some form of QC checks of the stored material. At the time of production, we would harvest the organisms in bulk from the master seed stock. They can be referred as the working stock. Harvested organisms are used for production, and then the batch is QC tested thoroughly using the multiple test methods and results that are published on this certificate of analysis. In a lab, you may decide to keep working culture in a slant or a plate and use it to inoculate your daily cultures. Passage numbers. This is one of the most important terms. One passage is defined as the transfer of organisms from an established culture to a fresh medium, generally meaning transfer of organisms from one plate or slant to the other. United States Pharmacopoeia USP offers a very clear definition of this, and they suggest that any form of subculture is termed as a passage. However, when you transfer the organism from a plate to a frozen vial, that will not be counted as a passage. However, upon thawing the material into a fresh plate, that will be a passage. How many passages are allowed is a question for discussion. There are some different guidance from different regulatory bodies across multiple industries such as pharma, clinical, and food or water regulatory bodies. However, there is a mutual agreement between all of them that the passage numbers should be kept to the minimum. The more subculture performed, the more chances for genetic drift, contamination, and mutations from the original strains, which we should avoid at all costs. The European Committee for Susceptibility Testing, EUCAST, suggests to prepare a subculture from an in-house vial, check for its purity, and then use the same to prepare daily cultures as part of the QC tests. Generally, organisms in such cultures would survive on a plate either at room temperature or refrigerator for a week. However, when it comes to any fastidious strains, they allow subcultures of the strain daily for no more than 1 week. Also, a noteworthy pearl of wisdom from EUCAST that when performing these subcultures, try using more than one colonies. This will avoid selection of mutants if they really happen to be present. The Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute, CLSI, limits the number of passages to 3 progenies from stock culture. CLSI has defined a diagram in AM02 for stock maintenance and storage of the stock culture. As you can see from the image, they refer progenies or subcultures as F1, F2, and F3. Stock cultures are prepared from the original culture received from a reputable source such as depositories or licensed derivative providers such as THERMOFISHER. F1 vials are prepared from the stock vial. It is advised to keep the F1 vial for no more than 1 month. Use them to prepare weekly cultures called F2, and using the cultures in F2, prepare the daily cultures F3. It is recommended to discard F2 cultures on a weekly basis, and starting fresh with a new F1 culture the month after. The image here is the best culture practice that complies with maturity of regulations. The simple essence of the diagram is that when you receive a qualitative culture in a convenience format like the Contol loops, make the first passage, that's your stock culture. You can then make working culture and use that for inoculating your daily cultures. Remember to get a new working culture every week and refresh your stock cultures every month. If you do plan to make some frozen stock, here are some of the best practice that you could follow. Always use 10 to 15% of a crop protectant, such as glycerol, in liquid broth, such as TSP. The golden rule for making frozen stock is that we freeze the material slow and thaw quick. It helps avoiding creating water crystals that can dramatically reduce the recovery. For freezing down, ideally the temperature needs to drop 1 degree centigrade per minute. There are some commercial products out there that use isopropanol, like Mr. Frosty from Nalgene or Coolcell from Biocision, that can help you achieve this. When thawing the vials, place them in 37-degree water bath for a quick thaw. All the major regulatory bodies suggest that the stock can be frozen at -30°C only for short term, and any long-term storage must be in -70 or lower, ideally in vapor phase liquid nitrogen. We get this question all the times. Can I use glass beads? It's difficult to find a regulatory practice to support this. However, there is some guidance available from United States Pharmacopoeia. Chapter 1117 suggests that once opened, do not refreeze any unused QC materials. If you are planning to use glass beads, when you take one bead out, the other beads would partially thaw, and repeated freeze thaw must be avoided. Not to forget, when you're making any frozen stocks, please refer to the manufacturer's instructions. Quite a few commercial producers like ourselves will ask you to avoid making frozen stocks. Important reason is that we have done a number of quality tests to ensure that the material works in your lab as a reference culture should. We have validated our production methods, and when you are making your own stock, there is a lack of validation data often. Also, you would need to be careful on recording data, labeling, and temperature maintenance. Any mistakes around QC organisms for a long-term study could prove an expensive mistake. Overall, our suggestion is that in longer term, complete reliance on commercially available derivative cultures may prove to be a cost-effective and a risk-averse solution than preparing and maintaining freezer stocks. To summarize, QC organisms must be sourced from reputable sources only. If you are making own freezer stocks, following best practices is crucial. Follow 4 weeks maintenance plan and refresh your cultures regularly. Overpassage materials are likely to yield unexpected results and errors. And in long term, complete reliance on commercial cultures like Contol loops, as opposed to making own freezer stocks, would prove to be a cost-effective and a risk-averse solutions. Please approach one of my colleagues for any questions you may have. Thank you.